families that have physically active parents, we can see that the children have a long-term sports participation. So this is a health-related issue actually, where parents have this important role in serving as role models. And pressure, you could say, is, for example, parents placing unattainable expectations on their children's sport performance, or parents pushing to pursue goals that seem to be more relevant to the parent than actually to the child. I mean, you're using social media to build up a completely, new identity on that platform. And I believe that can be very dangerous, especially for younger children.
Hi there, and welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. Now, my name is Dr. Steve Ingham, performance scientist by trade and training. And in these discussions with performance experts, practitioners and performers, I explore how we deliver performance, how we support others to perform, and the underpinning knowledge and concepts at play. I really hope you enjoy the conversations from today's episode or from the back catalogue. And if you do, it'd be great if you can take a chance to like and subscribe to the channel, or for the audio, take a moment to leave a review. It really helps the show. Right, let's get into the discussion. Welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. Now, today I'm delighted to have Valeria Eckardt join us. Now, Valeria is a sports psychologist from Munster University whose expertise focuses on the integral role of parents in sports. And in our conversation, we delve into how parents can effectively support their children's sporting careers, balancing encouragement with the right level of involvement and the impacts of social media on young athletes. In this episode, you'll learn about the crucial roles parents play as supporters and role models in sports, strategies for maintaining a healthy balance between providing support and applying pressure, essential communication techniques to ensure constructive feedback aligns with children's perceptions, the evolving roles parents need to assume as children progress through their different stages of athletic development, and the influence of sharenting and social media on setting expectations and the pressures that young athletes face. This episode should be useful if you're a parent, if you are supporting young athletes, or even if you're a sports administrator or a coach. Enjoy the episode. A very warm welcome to the podcast, Valeria. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. How about you?
I'm really good, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you, parenting in sport. I think it's a fascinating topic. And maybe if you could start us off, I mean, perhaps because as much as anything, I assume that many people listening might have experience as a parent. They might have received parental support through their sport, or at least perhaps they have observed or worked with parents. I wonder if you could start us off just by perhaps setting the scene, sharing some background thoughts about maybe what do we need to know and consider about the roles of parents and the dynamics at play.
Yes, sure. Maybe I'll start out with a personal note on that. So how I got into that topic actually of research. So while I was studying my master's program, we encountered a seminar where we talked about family relationships in sports, and I got very much interested into the topic of parents and their experiences. And as a psychologist, I was very annoyed at the time by media reports being usually about negative parental behavior. So sideline spectating that had aggressive comments, for example, or even you see some physical transgressions or conflicts between parents or parents and the referee, for example. And at the time I thought, well, there must be more to that. There cannot only be the negative side, or the negative impact maybe has to have a root. So I started to think about pursuing actually a PhD in that topic and trying to, delineate more of a fine-graded picture of how parents are actually involved in sports. So this was what initially sparked, you could say, my interest in the topic. And indeed, if we look at the literature, it is not so much only a negative image of sport parents. So broadly, we can distinguish in the literature 3 roles. You could say that parents are supporters, parents are role models, and parents are so-called interpreters. So what do
Hmm.
they mean by these three roles? They say in terms of support or support providers, we see that parents engage or are involved in different levels, you could say, of children's sport participation. So we see somewhat tangible support, meaning they provide a financial support, for example, for equipment or for travels, you could say. They provide an emotional support, cheering, motivating, comforting, maybe also after a defeat, is often what is associated with that. And then they also provide, let's say, in terms of an informational support, you could say. So they're giving children a feedback, or they're working on problems that they encounter and do some joint problem solving. So now across these three roles, actually, parents are heavily involved in sports, and the role as a role model, you could say, is one that parents are usually, let's say, being reminded of when they're being on the sideline and maybe the emotions get like too high, and then they're aggressively cheering, you could say. Because what we know is that children are often observing their parents. They do a social learning, so learning through observation what is accepted, you could say, in a sports. What we know is that this not only has implications for, you could say, behavior or emotions, but also for sport participation itself. Because if we look at families that have physically active parents, we can see that the children or adolescents, when growing up, actually have a long-term sports participation. So this is a health-related issue, actually, where parents have this important role in serving as role models. And if we take a closer look to what is most important, you could say, for children, then it's not so much about this tangible support, the financial support. Well, they're recognizing that, yes, mostly when they're growing up, though, and being adolescents. But what we know, especially for the younger children, being in competitive sports, is the emotional support. So being emotionally available, that is something that is very salient to children, that they value, that they would like to have from their parents. So being a parent, not being a coach, having that closeness. So this is roughly the picture that we paint there, which does not mean, though, that there's only a positive side. Of course not. So we say in research, we best explain it by a continuum. It is a complex involvement of parents in terms of ranging from parents who are disinterested and not involved at all, parents who are being the second coach on the sideline, providing technical, tactical, hints there for their children. And then we have very positively encouraging, warm parents on the sideline who also have maybe a positive relationship with coaches, all the way up until the other, let's say, extreme of the continuum to over-involved parents, which we sometimes know as these, helicopter parents or snowplow parents that try to, move away all the obstacles for their children. So it's a bit more complex than being black and white, than being negative and positive.
Wow. Okay. I love that term, snowplow, of clearing. I'm thinking some of them are more like a peace bully, as they're called, just pushing everything around. And does can I just check then? Interpreter where was that in that continuum? Was that the third position? Yeah, I'll ask you that question and come back to another question from your introduction.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. So interpreting means if children at a young age, you could say, first enter sports, they usually don't have an idea of what is success. And what parents are doing is through like a process of socialization, they're getting children accustomed to norms, to values that you have in a sport, not only in sports, but that you also have as a parent or as a family. So, meaning younger children, through conversations with their parents, get an idea, okay, when am I considered actually as being successful? Am I successful when I have won? Or am I successful also when I have put my best effort in, for example, and when I try to do the best job that I was able to do on that day, even though it might not have resulted in a win overall. And this is how parents are helping their children, you could say, to make sense of their experiences. This is what interpreting means. So they're offering an interpretation, you could say, of what children have actually experienced in sports. And we see that these most often occurs with values such as, success. When am I being successful? Also fairness, for example. When have I played fair? When am I a team player? But it transfers to other values as well. So learning outcomes or punctuality, respect, discipline, for example. So this is how the interpreting actually works for parents and children.
Okay, so the interpreter term could be interpreted in different ways because actually it's sort of decoding some of the social norms or the metrics of performance, but also in some ways it sounds as though it's co-coaching. It may well be that the lead coach might have their version of success, but that the parent has an opportunity to supplement that. So if it is just all let's all play nice and outcomes don't matter, then actually the parent can talk about trying to win or aspiring, and vice versa. That if a coach is all about the win, then the parent can interpret that and say, hey, look, there are other ways in which we can judge our performance.
Yes, definitely. So parents have the opportunity to offer a different perspective as well, you could say. What we know, though, is from studies or also reports from children, it often is actually difficult for children if parents and coaches are not aligned, you could say, in their interpretations or values, because then the child kind of feels in between and
Mm.
doesn't know, okay, so who am I going to listen to? Or, of course, I want to have this positive relationship with my parents. I want their love, I want their attention. And then it can get hard for children to having to decide, between the two options. When they're growing up, becoming adolescents, they try to make up their own minds. They maybe don't even need their parents as much for the interpreting. They maybe use their peer group and they have a totally different sense of interpretation as their parents, as it so often is. But especially for younger children, it can be hard being in between the coach and the parent.
I mean, even just at this part of the conversation, it feels as though the word under discussed is relevant to this whole area because all of the things that you've mentioned so far, and I'm sure you'll go on to explore, they feel obvious concepts that we should be aware of. Awareness is not enough. It's also intuitive enough to think, could we change these or could we develop our skills? I don't know where the field is at in terms of understanding parental involvement in sport, but what's your sense of the maturity of the area?
Yeah, that's a great observation, I think. So parenting and sport research and sport psychology started out as early in the 60s. So you would assume we have a pretty solid body of literature right now that we can rely on. And it has been sparking for roughly the past 10 to 15 years. So we really observe an increase in publications and also researchers being interested and dedicated in that area. Nevertheless, we can still say that it is somewhat a niche within sports psychology. So there are researchers across the globe, mostly English-speaking nations, the UK, Canada, North America, who are very much interested in pursuing the topic. For me, myself, being situated in Germany, I'm actually the only researcher that is working on the topic right now in my area. So it's a bit hard, you could say, sometimes to connect. And we have, I would say, a very solid foundation right now of getting an idea how parents are involved in sports and what effects of that involvement are, for example, on parents or also on children. And we're starting to get an idea of how we can support parents in sports based on the knowledge of that involvement, but these really fine graded differences, you could say. So how is there a difference between parental involvement in recreational compared to competitive settings or elite settings? This is, for example, such a, specific question that we have not gotten to that as a field yet. So we're not able to do many comparisons, or if we talk about cross-cultural influences, for example, there's also not too much literature out there yet, because mostly the researchers have worked within their own realm of the country. So I'd say it's a great field to get into if you're interested into parenting
Hmm.
research.
Yeah, okay, interesting to hear what's yet to come.
Hmm.
Um, and that makes me think about perhaps, well, what are some of the fundamentals? And assuming the parental involvement in sport actually exists, i.e., if the child-parent relationship is not strong and it doesn't happen, doesn't support, it doesn't actually help the child. Um, what's your sense of the balance that you typically see when you're making these observations between parents supporting and challenging their child?
Hmm. Hmm. So, in terms of a research perspective on that, we would say that parental involvement is multidimensional. So, we see it, as you just mentioned, in support or pressure. We would say pressure in
Right.
research
Okay.
instead of challenge. And then we can see it on, you could say, a quantitative and a qualitative level. So, quantitative simply, more or less, meaning how many hours, for example, do you put in as a parent each week for practice, for being present at competitions? And then qualitative relates more to, okay, so what am I actually doing in terms of support? So the features, the facets of support, you could say, or pressure. So now looking at support and pressure, we define it as support being parental behaviors which facilitate children's sport participation, and pressure, you could say, is, for example, parents placing unattainable expectations on their children's sport performance, or parents pushing to pursue goals that seem to be more relevant to the parent than actually to the child, you could say. Um, and we've started out by looking into support and pressure from a very dichotomous perspective. So we had it black and white, support and pressure. By now we know this is far more complex than just being support or pressure. There was a recent study from colleagues in Switzerland, for example, that said it needs both support and pressure of parents in order for children to progress into a competitive or elite stage. However, the tricky thing about that is it depends on the perception of the children. Meaning, it is very hard to do recommendations and saying that amount of support or that amount of pressure, that level of pressure is still beneficial, because even well-intended behaviors by a parent could be perceived by a child as actually pressuring. So we differentiate broadly between the provided support, for example, and the received support. So it very much depends on actually how children are viewing the support that is provided for them, and if they're, you could say, susceptible to them, if they actually take that offer. And then support has, many faces, and we can say that support in general has been associated with a range of positive outcomes for children. So if we look at emotional components, for example, we know that those children who experience high levels of support from their parents in generally tend to manage their emotions better. They're better in dealing with stress and adversities, for example. They experience enjoyment in their sports participation and a sense of self-esteem, for example, or physical competence, you could say. And this all contributes then to a long-term sport participation. which is super important because if we turn it around to the other side, we can see that pressuring parents are one of the top 3 reasons why children drop out of sport early.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And so the differentiation there, support and pressure, different to my use of support and challenge, where support might be more, I feel valued, and challenge might be more about being stretched. You're differentiating support and pressure into facilitative or unhelpful behaviors. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And
Yes.
if that's the case, then can you give a couple of examples where over supporting or what might be felt as support might actually turn into pressure, or even those that might feel like you're pressuring them might actually be supportive?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's easier to do for the first
Yeah,
example.
I wonder if it might be. I just wanted to keep it open. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me find an example for the first one where we might have a well-intended behavior as a parent, but it is actually perceived as pressuring or negative by children.
Right.
So what we often hear is in conversations with families is feedback situations, especially in the car ride home. So imagine you've been at a competition with your children as a parent or maybe even as parents, and then you get into the car and maybe it was a tough loss in that situation, and you're wanting to be supportive, maybe wanting to spark the conversation. So you're starting to talk about your own observations, for example, of the game, or you talk about providing recommendations, how it could be done differently the next time, thinking maybe I'd like to offer, some advice, some help, some support for that parent. Now, it can be in that situation that your child, this is very individual, thinks this is just really too much right now for me. I'm still so high on emotions. I'm still trying to process this game and what happened and maybe my frustration about it on my own. And I'm not ready yet to talk about it. And maybe I'm also not ready to talk about it with my parents at all. Yeah, this could also be the case. So there was a very interesting study actually from a colleague, Catherine Tamminen in Canada, who looked at this phenomenon, the car ride home. And for parents, they described it as, a moment where they had the opportunity to connect with their children, to offer recommendations or strategies, for example, and where they really thought they had some quality time to connect over sports. And for some of the children in that study, what they actually reported back was, oh gosh, this is really a forced situation. I cannot even get out of the car, and I kind of have to suffer through this ride home now and answer all these questions or listen to all of this advice that I'm getting from my parents. But my state, like my current emotional state, is not even close to being receptive to any of that.
Wow. I've now got flashbacks of those sorts of conversations, and perhaps that very difference between perception is useful for people to understand that there is a that needs working out. I hadn't ever imagined that a child would feel trapped in the car. You're constrained, because we always sort of think about, when you're walking alongside somebody, it's a non-threatening position, and so it's easier to have perhaps a constructive conversation. And so then that makes me wonder, how could parents better support or potentially challenge or develop a child? What's the best way in which they can hatch good conversations with their child?
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's a best way. So I'd love to have a recipe, and probably I could be getting rich if there was a recipe and I sell it. But what we know is it needs an individualized approach. So every child is different, every parent is different. We all have our own, personalities, backgrounds, experiences. So what we tell parents if we do workshops, for example, is sit down with your child regularly, ideally for the first time in the beginning of the season or even before it started, and have an honest and open conversation about it. You can do that with children as little as 6 to 7 years old. Then it's more of a playful manner. And then it might be tough getting, the puberty adolescent at the table, but usually it works out. And what we tell them is to ask them actually how they feel about their parents' involvement right now. So maybe they have their own observations about how their parents engaged in the last season, what they liked about that behavior, what they maybe did not like. Then it is about preferences. So asking, what would you like me to do? So what do you as a child actually expect from me as a parent? What can I do for you? And that seems to be an odd question in the beginning because we usually don't ask that as parents, but it has been proven very fruitful because that way you can come to an agreement, you could say, on certain features of support which are individually preferable by your child and which you can then act on as a parent. And for some children, it was that they wanted more positive comments, for example, from their parents. For others, it might be that they did not want their mom or their dad at all at the competitions because it made them just so nervous when they were there. And for others, it was give me 2 hours after the game for myself. I need a break. I need some time to process everything. And when I'm ready, I'm going to come to you and talk about the game. And by setting these, you could say, agreements or boundaries in the parent-child relationship, you can try to find out, so what is actually perceived by children as supportive from me as a parent. However, this conversation does not happen that often yet. So what we know from children, also the families we work with, is there is a lot of conversation about sports, mostly about results, mostly about scheduling or organization, who's picking up whom when, you could say, but not about an experience level. So what did I learn today? Or what do I enjoy about my sport, for example? What kind of expectations do I have for the next game? And how can I as a parent support that? These are questions that are not asked that commonly. And we're trying to work on getting in these regular check-ins to, have this mutual experience, you could say.
And so I love that idea about having an agreed approach. How do you want this to work? I mean, it's such a powerful question to get agreement, but also that you've sort of set some rules between you. Any tips on when? Because that doesn't always feel like it might be the most natural conversation to have. Is it just about just staying present and judging the moment about what maybe this is the right time, whether it's the kitchen table over breakfast or any thoughts about the moment in which people launch that conversation?
Yeah. So from our experience, it should be a moment where emotions are not high. So
Okay.
let's say, a relaxing moment where you know yourself as a parent, you're not stressed or you have other obligations to attend to in a bit. And also the child feels, safe and comfortable. You could say this can be in a completely different environment. For example, you're out for a walk or you're having a, I don't know, mother-daughter day, going shopping, and then you sit down in a cafe and do that. Or you can do it in reference to a certain occasion. So what we often do with parents is having that conversation once their child gets signed by, let's say,
Okay.
a performance center or an academy. And then this is to some extent a natural conversation because then parents can take this change that also comes to the whole family as, a reason to say, hey, let's sit down. I'm so proud of you, for example, that you made this jump into the Performance Academy. I was wondering if we could maybe talk about what that means for us now as a family, for example. And this comes quite natural because children are also noticing differences, transitioning from a recreational setting to a more performance or competitive oriented setting, you could say.
Yeah, okay. No, that's nice. And just imagining the types of situations. You might have an agreed way of working. Don't talk to me when we get in the car. Whatever the principles might be. Um, and what if the child then breaks those rules or norms and say, hey, look, how did I get on today? Just tell it like it is. Do you still try and encourage parents to take a coaching approach, active listening? How do you feel it went? What do you think happened? A debriefing sort of structure to support the child's own empowered learning, or actually, no, you've changed the rules. Here's my thoughts. What's your advice there?
Mhm. No, what we advise parents to do is to hold children accountable on what you agreed on. This would not only be
Okay.
relevant to sports, this is general parenting advice. If you have an agreement on certain, behavioral standards or ways of interaction in your relationship, and the other party is not living up to those agreements, then you should hold children accountable. Of course, in a constructive manner. I mean, of course, that's clear. But by that, they learn that this is an important value for parents, that it's important for parents to have that regular check in, to honor standards that you agreed on, for example. And they show an interest, an authentic interest in children, and learning for children that this is somewhat a structured approach, that they also have the flexibility to change though. So let's say someone didn't live up to an agreement. So after they were ready to talk, they didn't approach a parent. Well, then instead of the parent just ignoring that, for example, if they communicate about it transparently, then the child has the opportunity either to explain their experiences and perceptions, or say, maybe this approach isn't working out for me anymore. Can we talk about a different agreement? And then you actually allow children to have that sense of responsibility and competence, and to make up their mind about how they can satisfy their own needs. And I think that's a great learning outcome.
This episode of Supporting Champions podcast is sponsored by Athlete Now, the perfect platform for sports practitioners looking to expand their reach. Whether you're a sports scientist, therapist, or coach, Athlete Now helps you showcase your expertise, connect you directly with athletes, and grow your business. With no ads, no commissions, and access to industry discounts, is designed to make your services stand out. Join as a practitioner today to get listed, promote your services, and connect with athletes who need your support. And for athletes, it's free to sign up, giving you access to exclusive discount deals and direct connections with the best in the industry. Visit theathletenow.com to find out more. And this feels as though there is a delicacy to this that requires our artisanal, skillful, verbal intelligence, emotional intelligence, to be able to find the right time, find the right moment, but also approach this with the right mindset. And this is quite a complex skill for parents.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. So, sports parenting is hard. I believe parenting in general is hard. So absolutely. And I remember now actually an example from a workshop from a father. We were talking about providing feedback, and what feedback can have in terms of effects on their children. And he was reporting that he felt like it was his right as a parent to provide a feedback and also to be attending the competitions, because he said, I also put in, so much effort, and spending so much time like on the court and in the car, and I want to be part of this. Like, he also got very emotional about it, that he didn't want to miss out, on this opportunity with his child. But in essence, what we worked on was that it is up to the child. And if the child has the preference of rather not having their dad at the competition, then I'm afraid we kind of have to work through that process of, taking a step back as a parent and maybe having a safe distance and letting that go for the sake of the child. But this is super challenging for some parents.
Okay, so that's an interesting phrase, for the sake of the child,
Mm-hmm.
because I suppose those are famous cases or situations that have become known where I suppose maybe it's cliched, but parents are living their dreams through their child's. Um, and so this is an important reminder, isn't it, really, that our role as parents is as a guide to be there to support and develop our child. How do you think about outcomes when you're thinking about what's effective parenting? Are you thinking about somebody who is able to nudge somebody's performance standards up, or are you thinking about the growth of the behaviors and the characteristics and the morals and the ethical code that the child develops?
Yes, we're mostly thinking about the latter one.
Mm,
So I'm not aware of one study at all that looked at how parental support or parental behaviors have directly influenced success or non-success. What we are assuming is that parental support is one factor, a tremendous factor, but one factor on the way to success. And it can enable, as you said, for example, growth or positive constructs such as stress management, such as enjoyment, such as, a sense of discipline or belonging, for example. Also, a positive and warm perception of the parent-child relationship. So feeling this support can lead to a range of positive outcomes, which are then facilitated for peak performance. So when we're talking about parental support, we're talking in sports about so-called talent development environments. So parents are one environmental factor together with coaches, staff, facilities, you could say, which are trying to, set the foundation for children to, on the one hand, grow as an individual, and on the other hand, grow as an athlete, as a successful athlete. So this is where I would see parents and their behaviors in terms of outcomes. So really seeing it as you could say, oh my gosh, what is the? Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm missing the word. The little elements that are growing into each other.
cogs.
No. I'm sorry. I'm gonna repeat
It's
that
okay.
phrase in a second.
I've marked it, so don't worry. We'll edit this out.
Um, Let me quickly check it. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
Not my first language.
Well,
Um,
your English is outstanding. It's better than mine.
Thank you. Oh, like as a wheel, like as turning wheels.
Yeah, the cogs.
Oh, does it mean cogs? Oh, I'm not familiar.
Cog. Yeah, it's like where a wheel interlinks and drives a mechanism of sort. It's a cog.
Cog?
Cog. COG.
C-O-G, cog. Okay, so I'll repeat that sentence. Okay. Um, okay, so how we view parents would be interacting, for example, with athletes and with coaches as cogs who are um, in each other. Sometimes they're smooth if they're working out in a positive sense, sometimes it can get stuck, and we're trying to work just on one of them to have an ideal, you could say, development out of that.
Yeah, that's a really nice analogy of cogs, and it may well be that the start of their journey, maybe as a 6 or 7 year old, the parental cog might be massive, whereas it might be smaller as they get closer and closer to the top. Yeah, I love that. Do you
Yes.
see any differences in the research between father and mother differences? Now, there's going to be some differences in terms of just parental um, effects on behavior and growth and maturation for a child anyway. But are there any differences in the roles that fathers and mothers typically play in support of young athletes?
hmm So, in general, in terms of involvement, we can say that both parents can be involved, right? So, it is not that we can differentiate, you could say, between mothers usually being the ones that are, taking up all the decisions or doing all the practice, driving to practice or picking it up. It depends on, actually, you could say, to some extent, of their own sporting background. Sometimes we see families where one of the parents was involved in an organized sports as well, maybe even the same sport, and then it is, somewhat natural for that parent to be, you could say, the more responsible person or the more engaged person, for example. Um, in a recreational setting, so we actually saw in general that sports or deciding for a sport is to some extent a family decision. So it is usually parents who are first introducing children in sports, and in a recreational setting, it often was actually mothers who were then making the, you could say, final decision on which sport to take, although this is literature coming, you can say, from the 70s, 80s, so there might have been also other family structures and dynamics back then there, but this seemed to be the decisive factor, you could say. Um, it appeared to be the case that we have some, cross-gender influences. So father's interest in sport was more influential, for example, for both sons and daughters, and the parental encouragement from mothers was more influential for females than males,
Okay.
actually. So we sometimes see these cross-sectional, you could say, influence in family dynamics.
Mm. And I'm interested to know. I mean, you mentioned the 70s and 80s and so on, and certainly this is a conversation informed by my own daughters when they turned around and said to me, "How did you cope with social media when you were a child, Dad?" And I was like, "I didn't have a phone until I was 25," and I'm just curious to know, you know, how is this changing in response to changes in childhood influences?
Mhm. That's a great question and a really pressing question, I believe, too. Um, so, in terms of social media, we see that both parents and children, of course, are exposed to the effects of social media. In terms of the parental side, I believe really interesting for me was a phenomenon that's called sharenting. So, sharenting, to share, and parenting. So what parents are doing is they're sharing content, videos, texts, pictures of their children online on social media. Um, and most of the time, this is moments where they are proud of their children. So when children have engaged in successes, you could say, or funny images, you could say, to parents, which might also be received as embarrassing, though, later on by children.
Oh,
Um, Nevertheless, though, we were very much interested in the phenomenon of sharenting in sports. So we haven't pursued that idea yet, unfortunately. So I can't talk about it, but we know that parents, to some extent, use successes on social media of their children as portraying a favorable image of themselves as their parents. So parents are doing an impression management, you could say. So using their child as a positive example in sports. And then the other side, maybe, that comes in is where we know that really youth academies in football in Germany have trying to educate both children and parents is on the effects of social media itself. I mean, not only in terms of health related behaviors, but also in terms of what does that actually mean for my sporting career, you could say. And This is really a fascinating topic, but also I find a scaring topic, because a colleague of mine has forwarded me, it was a few months ago, actually an example of a youth player. I believe he was maybe 7 or 8 years old in football, and he had this complete social media Instagram presence about how he's going to be a super successful football player and using hashtags, tagging, the large German soccer clubs in there. And I looked at it and I was shocked, to be honest. In the beginning, I thought, what are they doing? What happens to that child? I hope not, but what happens if he would get deselected? I mean, you're using social media to build up a completely, new identity on that platform. And I believe that can be very dangerous, especially for younger children. However, being knowledgeable and literate on how to deal with social media or how to leverage it for your career, we see can be super helpful for children, especially in sports where they are not as, financially supported as maybe in football, talking about sponsorships.
Mm. Wow. That's concerning to hear that. You hear of children being selected into academies at very young ages these days, and the commoditization of players in as products that clubs can sell in terms of shirt sales, for example, advertisements. You can then only assume that that's going to creep younger and younger. That certainly feels as though that is something that clubs need to get a handle on, or think about ethically. Coming back to parenting, what would you like to see? I mean, this is probably sort of, some big picture thoughts. What would you like to see from organisations who have children in their care? What would you like to see in terms of their support for parents?
Yeah, thanks for letting me explore on that. What I would love to have for, governing bodies in sports is have quality criteria. Have quality criteria or recommendations for parents on parental support. This would be one area. And then also have quality criteria on what it means to cooperate, to work well together between parents, coaches, and clubs or organizations. So kind of like we have in schools, some countries have quality criteria for parent-teacher relationships. I'd love to have that for sports. I think it is super important. It would be very feasible actually to draw from these ideas that we have developed in a school setting, to transfer that into sports. And I think this would ensure that parents can actually live up to this positive role of being a supportive parent. Because being frankly honest, what we observe or what we know from conversations with parents is it's trial and error. They want to do the best they can for many instances, but they don't know how. And they are not being told how to do it. And then I find it honestly by some coaches or organizations a bit hypocritical to say, well, the parents, we're having problem parents who are not behaving in the way that we want them to behave. Well, yes, but maybe you also didn't tell them in the first place on how they actually should behave positively. So a great development, which I see for the future, is we started out in Germany here for the football academies to have a spokesperson for parents, to have one role in the staff of the academy that is only responsible for attending to parents' needs, to parents' concerns, to thinking about what this journey might be offering in terms of benefits, but also struggles for parents, and how parents can best be integrated, you could say, in that performance setting. So we're starting out with that. I'm not familiar with that position in many other countries, or even other sports, you could say. But this, I believe, is a very promising future wish of me, if you would
Mm.
say so, that I'd love to have for parents, to have someone, to guide them through this pathway of competitive sports, because many parents are entering it kind of as a blank sheet. They're initially very amazed by how professional and competitive sports, are setting the scene and all the opportunities and facilities and the professionalism of coaching. But when they move on, we know from studies that it's kind of a dawning of reality. So they're noticing, okay, there are also a lot of sacrifices that my children, but also me as parents, have to take. There might be unexpected challenges that are occurring. And then this is a phase of adaptation where many parents actually get frustrated and, have this cycle of, I'm trying to do my best, but I don't really how, and no one's offering me the support. And I would love for parents to actually, not be in that cycle.
Mm. It doesn't feel as though that's just a nice to have. It's just it's a nice supportive scheme of work that's run by a trust. It feels as though that is preventative for issues. It feels as though that could be enhancing engagement. It could also feel as though there's an improved investment in terms of the business side of things, in terms of the affiliation of a player with a particular club. So it feels as though that's an opportunity to actually improve business processes as well as the community and the ethic of a club.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see there are two levels. So in terms of coaching, so being a coach, a lot of times coaches tell us we rather do not want to engage too much with parents because we are afraid then they're becoming over involved and we can't live up to that anymore. So what we're telling coaches though is if you are, being straight up front in the beginning of the season about what your expectations are, about maybe what your modes of communication are, what your boundaries are, where you see opportunities for involvement of parents, then this actually prevents parents of being, too involved, of being there every single time after practice, having the need for a conversation, for example. So it takes off a lot of stress and pressure actually on coaches. And if we look at the organizational level, we have conducted projects with football academies ranging from, the Bundesliga, the highest league in Germany, all the way down to fifth league. And they have mentioned, especially those academies who were not belonging to the top clubs in Germany, that by doing a good job in integrating parents, in onboarding them to an academy and trying to provide, a welcoming, appreciative atmosphere, that they actually noticed they could keep players, talented players, for a longer time, and they wouldn't go away to sign with a different club. Because again, sports is a family decision.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Fascinating. So, Valeria, I'm interested to know how, as a child grows and develops and ages, how does a parent's role typically change?
Mhm. Yeah, so what we see is we broadly distinguish three career stages, you could say. We have an initial sampling stage, which is between, you say, 6 to 13 years. We have a specialization stage from 13 to 15 years, where children narrow down their sports more. Maybe they don't concentrate on many sports, but two or focus sports, you could say. And then an investment stage, which usually refers to a more competitive elite stage focusing on one sport, and then it usually is 15 years plus. And across these stages, you could say that when children are starting out in sport in the sampling stage, so trying out maybe different sports, trying to find a peak interest, Parents should be supportive of free play, of enjoyment, of the skill learning initially on, and just being, emotionally available for their children, and offering this conversation about the experiences, or interpreting the experiences that children actually have. Once they are progressing to a specialization stage, so 13 to 15 years, parents should be more concerned about taking a step back, supporting athletes' autonomy development, giving a sense of responsibility back to children, while they're also noticing, an increase in other areas of parental support, especially financial support increases, or also emotional and time investments. And this is a phase in sport that corresponds also with puberty and developments of individualization. And this in general can be a tough time for families to navigate. So we experience that parents often find it difficult, this first change of roles, from being the very first person that your child wants to talk to noticing that you're, maybe losing a bit of your standing, you could say, because children are more reactive to peer groups or to coaches, for example. And then in an investment stage, when we're talking about 15 years plus, 16, 17 going on, parents are observed to be rather in the background. They're acting in the background. They can do some individual considerations of how to support their children, but it is more of an you could say come and go basis. So whenever I feel the need to address my parents, I'm using that opportunity. But in many, especially professional environments, we see that we have other person or staff members or even managers involved at that stage already. So parents are, not having this this preliminary role, as you would say, for younger children.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And so a number of stakeholders, it could be agents, it could be head coaches, academy managers, performance directors, or a whole list of different roles as the seniority or the level goes up. Yeah, interesting. Super, Valeria. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I've been educated thoroughly, and I think it's important for people to listen to this and understand that there's an opportunity here to better support. This under-discussed is a word that I've seen in some of the literature, and I just feel as though there's a sort of a pioneering aspect of this, of your work, and an opportunity for people to improve the way that they support young people through sport. Where could people find out more?
So we have a few resources online. If you would like to check out the website Sport Parent EU, you find a really nice set of resources, texts and descriptions, recommendations, strategies, but also videos of parenting that you could check out. And there has also been 2 parent handbooks. I'm happy to link them in this episode for all the audience interested in that. It's a parent handbook from the Utah State University, Travis Dorsch. So they provided recommendations for parents, also for coaches. And then there has been a handbook for parents in football academies from the German Soccer Association and German Soccer League. It has been translated in English as well. So maybe this is also, in terms of cross-cultural audience, a nice way to get started on that.
Super. Thank you for sharing your insights today, and thank you for those resources.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, please take a chance to press like and subscribe to the channel. And for audio, please do leave a review. Thank you.